Title: The Girl Who Bought the Storm's Map. When I was 3 years old, my family laid out a red silk cloth for the old custom of choosing a future. There were the usual things. On it, a banknote, a jade lock, a brush, a steamed bun, a toy horse. I crawled past every single one of them and closed my fist around the black iron key hanging from my mother's wrist. The key was old, heavy, and cold enough to make me wince. It opened the first warehouse my parents had ever rented when they had nothing but a truck, a ledger, and more nerve than money. My father laughed so hard he nearly dropped his tea. "Good," he said, lifting me into the air. "She does not want ornaments. She wants entry. Let her grow up. She will either ruin us all or build something no one can take away."
For
years, everyone repeated that story whenever they wanted to explain me. When I was 10, I borrowed my classmates' lunch money at the start of the week and lent it back to them in portions after school with candy interest. When I was 13, I figured out which tutoring slots were most coveted and quietly resolved my own cancellations to desperate parents for 3 times the original price. By 15, half the girls in my class had prettier bags than I did, but their pocket money came to me in neat little streams. I was not greedy in the way people like to mock. I simply understood early that money was only the visible skin of power. What mattered more was control. Who held the key? Who wrote the timing? Who decided which door opened and which stayed shut? By the time I graduated, my father had turned our northern logistics company into a serious player in ports, bonded warehousing, and cross-border
freight.
He still called me Little Key whenever he was in a good mood. The newspapers called me the Beijing Princess of Inland Shipping after I built a route optimization startup in college and sold it for more money than 2 of our family subsidiaries had made that year. The board called me difficult. Our competitors called me dangerous. Men who had inherited more than they had ever earned called me ambitious, the way people call a knife sharp after it has already cut them. I entered the family company officially at 26. My first assignment was supposed to be simple. At least that was what the old men told me over their porcelain cups and their practiced smiles. The project was called North Key 9. Officially, it was a redevelopment zone at the edge of the Riverport Belt, cold storage, customs inspection, bonded warehouses, a clean energy charging yard, and a data-linked dispatch center that would tie rail and river routes together. Unofficially, it was the future of the entire corridor. Whoever controlled North Key 9 would control distribution through 3 provinces within 5 years. The other bidder was the Liu family and their chosen negotiator was Liu Chengze. If you believe the magazines, Liu Chengze was a model heir, educated abroad, handsome, measured, never raised his voice, and always photographed in gray suits that made older investors think of stability and younger women. Think of marriage. If you believed people who actually did business, he was polished the way a blade is, polished before it is sold as decoration. There had once been loose talk between our 2 families about a possible alliance, a marriage, eventually, if business aligned, and personalities did not clash too violently. The old men loved to speak of it as though daughters and port access belonged in the same category of strategic assets. The first time I sat across from Liu Chengze in a conference room, he smiled as if we were already halfway to a wedding photograph. He slid the draft framework toward me with 2 fingers and said, out of respect for Uncle Moo, I can let your side take 40% of the operating profit. I did not touch the contract. Instead, I looked at his cufflinks. Blue enamel, understated, expensive, inherited, taste pretending to be personal style. Then I held up one hand. He smiled wider. Only
50 then. That sounds more reasonable.
I curled my fingers into a fist and placed it on the table between us. What I mean, I said, is that I take the whole operating spine and the dispatch system. You can keep the ceremonial ribbon and give speeches over the first shovel of dirt if you like. For the first time, the smile left his face. The people behind him stiffened. The assistant beside me stopped breathing. "Miss Moo," he said after a pause, "I think you misunderstand the basis of this meeting." "I do not," I replied. "You need capital, but more urgently, you need someone who can run what you are pretending you built. Your shipping side lost 2 anchor clients in the last quarter. Your debt rollover window narrows in 6 weeks. And the environmental review for your riverside soil has not truly been cleared, only delayed." There it was.
A
Faint flicker in his eyes.
Not fear. Men like Lu Chengze did not feel fear first. They felt insult. He leaned back. Did you? Have me investigated. I folded my hands. If I'm expected to discuss a billion yuan corridor with someone I prefer to know, whether he is bringing cash or just a family. Crest, one of his vice presidents, cut in
Sharply. This is slander.
I opened the file I had brought and slid a single page across.
The table.
Remediation estimates, groundwater, contamination markers, unsigned but authentic. Enough to sting. Call it due diligence. I said, you want me to step into a site with hidden liabilities while your family keeps the steering wheel?
No.
If I put our capital into this, I control execution, remediation, dispatch architecture, and long-term tenant selection. You get paid? You do not get to drive. Lu Chengzi stared at the page. Then he looked up at me and laughed once, softly, without humor. People said you were arrogant.
I thought they
We're exaggerating because men fear competent. Women? I see now they were being charitable. I smiled back. And people said you were capable. We both had disappointing afternoons. He stood, the chair legs scraped hard across the polished floor. Enjoy this while you can. Miss Moo, the river is not yours just because. You learn to speak loudly in boardrooms. I did not rise. The river belongs to whoever knows where it will flood. He left with his entire team in, a cloud of expensive cologne and controlled
rage.
the door shut hard enough to rattle the glass. My vice president, old Han, wiped his forehead and whispered, Director Moo, was that necessary? The Liu family has relationships across customs, freight, and bulk materials. Making an enemy this early could cost us the
project.
I closed the folder. It already cost us the project if we agree. To be fools. That night, my father was waiting for me in the old family house. He sat under the yellow light in the sitting room, with his glasses low on his nose, pretending to read. On the tea table lay 2 boxes of imported bird's nest and 1 ridiculous tin of European biscuits. The Liu family's apology performance had arrived before I did. Without looking up, my father said, did you really ask for the entire operating spine?
Yes.
He turned a page he had not read. Did you also tell Lu Chengzi that his family crest is not legal tender? I might have improved the wording, but not the message. My father closed the magazine at last. There was no anger in his face, only the fatigue of a man who had spent too many years translating between the old world and the new. Do you know what the industry is saying about you already? They are calling you the bandit.
Princess.
I poured myself tea. Better that than ornament. He looked at me for a long moment and sighed.
Show me what?
You saw? That was why I loved him, even when he annoyed me. He never asked me to be smaller. Before he asked me to explain myself, I handed him the full risk memo. He read slower than I wanted, tapping 2 fingers on the table whenever a number irritated him. By the end, his brows had drawn tight. The contamination issue is real, he said. And these rollover obligations, he exhaled through his nose. Lu Chengze is trying to use our capital to cover a bridge loan and pray the site does not explode under someone else's feet.
Exactly.
Then, why do you still want the project? I took a sip of tea and said, because hidden rot is useful if you are the one who found it first. If I control it, I can convert the Riverside section into a remediation showcase and bonded cultural corridor. Government incentives cover part of the cleanup. The charging yard can move east. The data hub remains. The value goes up, not down, but only if no one sentimental is left holding veto power. My father said nothing. Outside, wind moved through the ginkgo trees in the courtyard. Finally, he asked, how much trouble do you expect Lu Chengze to make? I set down the cup, as much as he can afford, then more than that. I was right. The next morning, 3 things happened in less than 2 hours. First, our primary steel supplier called to say that an unexpected upstream shortage meant they could not fulfill our order window. Second, the bank that had verbally approved our construction credit line informed us that a new anonymous report had raised concerns about the transparency of our subsidiary accounts. Third, the consulting firm responsible for one of our early planning models suddenly withdrew, claiming scheduling conflict.
None.
Of those things were coincidence, all of them smelled like Lu Chengze's version of patience. At 10:13 a.m., he sent me a message.
B.
Sensible. We both know this project is too big for
Stubbornness.
come to dinner tonight at River Lantern Hall. Sign at 5050. I will tell Everyone yesterday was merely a misunderstanding. There was a second message, 30 seconds later,
You do not need to prove anything to your
father by turning every negotiation into war. I stared at the words until I laughed aloud. Men like him always mistook defiance for performance, as if a woman could only want power when she had an audience, as if I had not been building toward this since I was small enough to close my fist around an iron key. I did not answer. Instead, I called the one man in the industry the Lu family hated most. Gao Renyu had made his fortune in battery-grade minerals, foreign port tie-ups, and logistics routes so aggressive that older operators referred to him as a pirate with balance sheets. He was also vain, impatient, and deeply flattered by anyone who treated him like a force rather than a vulgar accident.
Chairman. Gao, I said when he picked up.
I have changed my mind about your offer from last winter. If you are still interested in gaining guaranteed inland dispatch access before the Southern Consortium closes the door, I think.
We should talk tonight.
He was silent, just long enough to become intrigued.
That
Depends, he said. Am I talking to your father or to the little wolf herself, to the only person in my family willing to move before everyone else? Finishes yawning, he laughed.
Good.
Send me the time. By evening, he was seated across from me in a private room, chewing smoked fish with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he was always one step from
Victory.
He asked for 30% of the whole corridor in exchange for capital materials and political shielding. I let him finish. Then I gave him a second folder. Not Quay. 9. It was a blueprint for something else. Closed loop storage and inland distribution. Grid for energy cells and temperature-sensitive cargo tied directly to his mineral interests and our transport model. If Quay 9 succeeded under my control, it would become the pilot anchor of an entire
Network.
He stopped chewing. He read in silence for 7 full minutes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright. This was not supposed to be a land deal for you at all, was it? It was never a land.
deal, I said.
It was a switchyard. The site is only the visible part. I want the routes, the data, and the dependency that comes. After, he wiped his mouth slowly, and if I back you now, you get guaranteed throughput and first priority placement across the grid at a rate the Lu family can never match because they still think in parcels, not
Systems.
He leaned back and whistled softly. You are your father's daughter, and not at all your father's daughter. I hear that often. He lifted his cup toward me. Done. I like ambitious people.
They do not waste my evenings.
The money landed before dawn. So did a bridging materials commitment, routed through one of his southern affiliates. The bank's mood changed by noon.
Funny what?
Happens to risk committees when they discover. A richer friend at the table
Lu Chengze.
called me in the middle of the afternoon.
You?
Brought Gao Renyu in, he asked without greeting.
I did not think you would lower yourself that far.
I was reviewing dispatch architecture.
Diagrams.
I did not realize pragmatism had a social ranking. He ruins everything he touches. So do weak airs with polished
Shoes.
His breathing sharpened. You know what people will say? That you only
Know how to win by inviting wolves into the
barn. Then it is fortunate I was never trying to raise sheep. He went quiet.
Then
Unexpectedly, his voice softened.
Jinghe.
we
Grew up in the same circle. Do we really need to turn this into something ugly? If you pull back now, we can still discuss the family arrangement.
My mother. Likes you?
My father respects your father. There's no need to make yourself difficult in public. That more than anything told me he was worried, not about the money alone, about humiliation, about becoming the man who had failed to contain me. I closed my eyes for 1 second and saw a completely different room from years earlier. University competition finals. Stage bright with lights. Lu Chengze smiling modestly as he accepted. First prize for logistics innovation.
proposal.
A proposal built on work stolen from my hard drive the night before submission.
Not
Copied perfectly. Stripped of its depth. Flattened into something judges could clap.
for.
I had sat in the dark auditorium and watched him thank no one. Later, I found the hacker who had been paid to breach my laptop, not through
Luck.
through obsession. I lost money chasing false leads, found forum, ghosts and basement coders, and finally, cornered a thin, furious boy in a gaming cafe. Thick with cigarette smoke and stale instant noodles. He called himself Black Reef. He expected me to scream or report him. Instead, I paid him twice what Lu Chengze had. Then I offered him something larger. Not forgiveness, never that, but work. Clean money for dirty skills with rules attached.
No.
A tax I did not approve. No targets without
Purpose.
no pretending to be more moral than either of us were. He laughed in my face and took the card anyway. Since then, Black Reef had become a shadow nobody in the industry knew I carried. The only person who ever noticed irregular traces and nearly found him was Lu Changji, which made the next discovery all the more satisfying. 3 nights after Gaorenyu committed, Black Reef called me at 3:41 a.m. There's an offshore account you need to care about now, he said.
No, let me guess. I
Murmured, sitting up in bed. Luxembourg. Singapore, one of the usual places rich men hide their sins, Cayman structure, but that is not the
interesting part.
The interesting part is where 2 small payments ended up.
1 to a
Private hospital in Singapore for neonatal DNA. Registration 1 to a Swiss law firm known for inheritance. Shielding and illegitimate heir negotiations. I was fully awake now. Whose account? He named a subsidiary trust vehicle linked very carefully, very quietly to the Lu family. I stood and went to the window. Below, Beijing glowed like circuitry. Who is the beneficiary? Not Lu Chengze Black, Reef said. A woman first, then a man.
the
Woman is his father's former secretary. The man controls 2 private forwarding companies currently embedded in your prospective supply chain under nominee structures. He is almost certainly Lu, Jiaming's eldest biological child, kept outside the official family line. For a long
moment I said nothing.
I had assumed the Lu family pressure on my suppliers came from old relationships and loose coercion. This was worse. It meant part of the chokehold against me belonged not to the official heir, but to a hidden one. And hidden children raised in the dark either wanted legitimacy or revenge. Sometimes both.
Can you find him? I asked.
Black Reef snorted. I already did. He is in Singapore. This week with the Swiss lawyer. If you leave within 2 hours, you can still catch the meeting. I was on the plane by sunrise. Singapore smelled of polished money and controlled weather. The man I went to meet was named Luo Yan. He was younger than Lu Chengze by 3 years. Taller, sharper around the mouth, with the watchfulness of someone who had never once mistaken access for acceptance. He opened the hotel suite door, wearing a bathrobe over a shirt still buttoned at the throat. Not careless then, just annoyed. When he saw me, surprise flashed, then amusement. Director Mu, he said, "This is either a very flattering scandal or a very dangerous visit."
Probably both.
He let me in. The lawyer was not
There.
That meant he had privacy enough to be honest or foolish. I sat without asking permission.
You control.
Hengda Freight and River Crest Materials. Through nominee chains, your father uses your companies as deniable leverage.
Lu Chengze.
Thinks he is pressuring me. He does not know the hands on the ropes belong to you. Luo Yan did not deny it. He crossed one ankle over his knee and regarded me thoughtfully. And if all that were true, why? Would I help you? My father funds my silence. Your failure strengthens my bargaining position inside the family. Not enough, I said. If it were enough, you would not be paying Swiss lawyers to discuss bloodlines and inheritance structures. You do not want an allowance. You want exit or war? His expression thinned. Careful. I prefer precision. I laid out the offer. Cash for full transfer of controlling stakes in the 2 critical companies, additional payment for all internal evidence of Lu Chengze's off-book gambling, losses, disguised capital drains, and procurement manipulation. And one more thing, a secondary arrangement. Establishing independent overseas storage, rights under Gao Renyu's network if Luo Yan wanted to disappear from the Lu family's shadow permanently. You want me to sell you the knife at my father's throat, he said.
No.
I want you to stop letting him hold the handle. While pretending you're dangerous. Take the money. Take your mother. Go wherever men with your intelligence go when they no longer care. About family portraits, he laughed then. Genuinely, you are cruel. Only where necessary. And if I refuse, then I forward the lawyer's itinerary, the DNA registration trail, and the nominee chains to Lu Chengze and every creditor currently pretending not to see the cracks in your family. Your father will cut you loose before sunset. Your half-brother will do it with a speech about principles. Silence stretched.
The
Hotel air conditioning hummed. Finally, he said, "How much?" I named the price. He named a higher one. We met in the middle because real enemies respect each other enough to haggle properly. By noon, I owned the companies that had been strangling my project. By evening, I had digital copies of every document I needed to break Lu Chengze's posture in half. But winning on paper and controlling the battlefield were different things.
Back in
Beijing, the old guard inside our newly expanded project group began resisting in more subtle ways. The design package leaked. A shipment specification was altered by 3 millimeters in a place only a saboteur would consider unimportant and an engineer would immediately understand could become catastrophic. An anonymous complaint about my improper relationship with Gao Renyu made its way through 2 trade media accounts known for blackmail disguised as gossip.
I called an
all-hands leadership meeting in the former Lu side conference hall. The men sitting around that table were in their 50s and 60s, gray at the temples, careful with their expressions, offended at the sight of a woman in her 20s occupying the central chair without apology. Vice President Chen, a man with a polished head and soft hands, spoke first. Director Mu, some of us feel the project is moving too fast. The remediation pivot, the charging yard, relocation, the restructured dispatch.
Hierarchy.
We built this industry on caution.
did.
you, I asked.
Interesting. Because the purchase records for your Brazilian alloy imports 3 years ago show a recurring quantity discrepancy of 2.8%, not enough to trigger automatic review, just enough to purchase a bright orange Porsche. Over time. Caution is not the word I would choose. The room froze. Chen's face lost color. 2 men at his left stared openly at him. Now, he began to stand, then sit, then stand again.
I think he said weakly, I may need to.
Resign for health reasons. You should, I said. And do it before I decide to call the regulators instead of HR. He stumbled out. No one else spoke. Then I changed my tone. Here's the part I actually want you to hear, I said. Anyone who helps me make this corridor profitable will be paid better than they were. Under the Lu family, I do not care about your age, your drinking relationships, your golfing partners, or the number of years you have spent warming expensive chairs. I care about
Useful work.
bring me value and you will have room. Betray me and I will turn your next 10 years into a cautionary tale. I promoted a quiet 40-year-old operations director named Zhou Qian on the spot. Not because he flattered me, because he never did. He kept good notes, asked unpleasant questions, and did not smell of inherited
Privilege.
That was enough. 3 days later, I laid a trap. I prepared 3 near-identical strategic packages for the next phase of Q9 each, with 1 different false vulnerability hidden. Inside, I gave each version to a different senior executive under the pretense of seeking confidential review. Only one of those vulnerabilities appeared. 48 hours later in a competitor's internal briefing that Black Reef intercepted. So I knew who my leak was. At the next meeting, I let the room settle. Before I said, Chairman Lu, you should be more discreet when selling my planning documents. At least ask for a better title than special consultant before betraying your employer. Liu's face emptied. He opened his mouth, closed it. Sweat broke across his upper lip. I did not raise my voice. I'm not sending you to prison because I have no time to babysit a public spectacle. But if you're still in this city next week, I will reconsider.
Leave now.
He left. Everyone else understood. After that, resistance changed shape. Not open.
Sabotage anymore.
Fear. Then calculation. Then
Obedience.
which was fine. People like to romanticize loyalty. I preferred alignment. The real confrontation, however, belonged not in meeting rooms but at the emergency creditor. Some at the Lu family convened once their internal bleeding could no longer be concealed. It was held at a private club where old money liked to pretend ruin was still elegant. Lu Jianming sat at the head of the long table, older overnight. Lu Chengzai sat at his right, face pale, jaw set so hard I thought one of his molars might crack. Around them were bankers, major suppliers too, cousins with useless opinions, and my father, invited because everyone still hoped business and old friendships might soften what was coming. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. Every head turned. Lu Chengzai looked at me as if he had not decided whether to strangle or beg. Director.
Moo, he said.
I was not aware this was open.
Attendance.
It is now. I placed 3 folders on the table, 1 in front of Lu,
Jianming.
1 in front of the lead bank representative, 1 in front of my father because respect matters most when it changes nothing. Inside were the documents Lu Yan had sold me, the gambling outflows, the nominee structures, the disguised debt obligations, the procurement fraud, and a full exposure memo on the contamination concealment at Quay 9. Enough to kill confidence. Enough to kill credit. Enough to kill legacy.
Lu Jianming's hands
Shook as he turned pages. The banker beside him stopped pretending composure by page 4. My father did not look surprised, only tired.
What do you want?
Lu Jianming asked at last. Voice low and raw, there are moments in business when the performance falls away. No family language.
No.
Vague phrases about harmony. Just price. I answered simply, not your son's smile. Not your family's apology. Not your blessing. I want the logistics arm carved out and folded into my operating company under a debt equity or SKU structure.
I want full board control.
For 7 years, I want your personal guarantee on the legacy liabilities, and I want Lu Chengze removed from all executive decision-making effective. Immediately, Lu Chengze slammed both palms on the table. Absolutely not. I looked at
Him.
Absolutely yes.
He stood, breathing hard. You think one pile of documents means you have won?
You think because you managed to buy my
Bastard half-brother and crawl into 1 week.
Point you understand the Liu family? No, I
Said, I understand you.
That is enough.
He stared at me. Then, astonishingly, he changed tactics. Perhaps desperation finally stripped vanity of its costume. Jinghe, he said quietly, almost intimately, we do not need to do this. If the issue is trust, we can fix it. If the issue is the old engagement, we can revisit it.
properly?
I know I have underestimated you before. That was my mistake. But you know me. You know how these families work. Marry into ours, and none of this has to become war.
There it.
Was the offer he thought would calm any woman raised in our circles. A place at the table if I agreed to sit where he pointed. I smiled. It was not a kind smile. Do you know the difference between us, Lu Chengze, he said.
Nothing.
You still think marriage is a reward. You can grant, I think it is a merger that only makes sense if both sides gain more than they.
Lows.
You are no longer worth the paperwork. I turned to Lu Jianming. You have until midnight. After that, the bank receives the complete evidence package. The press gets a cleaner version, and the regulators receive the contamination concealment chain. Your son will not merely lose his title. He will acquire criminal relevance. No one stopped me when I left at 11:32 p.m. The signed rescue framework arrived. The Lu family's logistics arm came to us through layers of debt, shame, and silent signatures. Lu Chengze disappeared from public view for
Months.
rumor said he was sent abroad for strategic study. Rumor also said he spent most of that time vomiting into hotel sinks and learning what it felt like to have doors close in his face. I did not care. The integration nearly killed me anyway. Mergers are not battles won and won glorious.
Charge.
They are trench wars fought in spreadsheets. Labor structures, software systems, customs, registrations, union appeasement, supplier, renegotiations, and the psychological management of men who resent answering to someone younger, female, and correct. I slept in the office twice a week for 3
Months.
My meals came in paper boxes.
My?
Taylor complained that I had lost too much weight in the shoulders. My mother sent soup. My father sent blunt messages like, if you collapse before signing the 4th stage leases, I will laugh first and call an ambulance second. That was his version of affection. In the middle of it all, I found one old iron key in a drawer I rarely opened. Not my mother's original, a duplicate I had made years ago and forgotten. I turned it over in my palm and remembered again I had never wanted the gold itself. I had wanted the right to open what other people guarded. By spring, Quay 9, no longer resembled the thing Lu Chengze had tried to sell me. The contaminated section became a visible remediation landmark with transparent public reporting and policy praise. The charging yard moved east and doubled in efficiency. The data center signed its first multi-route tenant. Cold chain occupancy hit 90% before full completion. Gao Renyu, smug and delighted, sent me a case of wine with a note that read, predators should never arrive late to dinner. The financial press changed its tone. Bandit Princess became Iron Daughter, then Northport Queen, then simply the woman who had rewritten the inland rules. I disliked all of it. Titles are for people who need the room to introduce them. Results speak faster. Still, on the day the final controlling shares settled and the last of the Lu-linked hidden liabilities transferred cleanly out of our risk books, my father came to my office with 2 cups of tea. He stood by the window beside Me, both of us looking over the city. Your mother says you have not visited in 3 weeks, he remarked. I have been busy rescuing. The dynasty? He grunted. Arrogant child. Genetic, I'm told. He handed me 1 cup. For a while we drank in silence. Then he said, without looking at me, you. No, when you grabbed that key, all those years ago, I thought I was joking when I said, you would either ruin us or build something one could take away. I said nothing. He finally turned his head. The corners of his eyes were wet, though his voice remained steady. You were always too sharp for anyone who wanted a daughter they could display. Good thing I never had such poor taste that nearly undid me. Nearly. I swallowed it down because sentiment is safest when it is brief. A week later, during a luxury finance forum where men in dark suits applauded each other for surviving decisions made by younger staff, the chairman of Kaiwan group gave a speech about discipline. This amused me because last year he had dismissed me publicly as a girl who had only inherited a surname and some cheekbones.
Now.
He mentioned the promising new order in northern logistics and glanced toward me with practiced civility. I applauded with everyone else, but I had already read the debt maturity chart. For 2 of Kaiwan's overseas units, I had already learned which of their asset managers were over-leveraged. I had already asked Black Reef to map the shell structures around their insurance claims, and I had already invited 2 of their most underappreciated executives to breakfast. Separately, under the pretense of discussing nothing at all, later that evening I returned to my penthouse alone, no husband waiting.
No.
Fiance performing composure. No old men discussing my future as though I were a decorative clause in a contract. I poured myself a small drink and stood by the glass. The city below was a map made of veins and light. On my wrist gleamed the custom gold cuff I had commissioned after the Lou rescue. Closed, a serpent eating its own tail. A circle with teeth. A promise that what entered my hand would not leave it easily. People said I loved money. They were wrong in the shallow way. People are wrong when they only look at the shine on the surface. What I loved was reach, leverage, permission that did not need to be granted. The right to look at an old rule, decide it, was written by timid men and then replace it. Far across the skyline, the Kaiwan Tower flashed in cold white lines against the dark. I lifted my glass toward it. You are next, I said softly. The night gave no answer. It did not need to. I already had the map. There was another story people in our circle liked to tell about me, though they never told it to my face when I was old enough to hear the contempt properly. At 19, during my second year at university, I had built a tiny student-run distribution business out of almost nothing. I called it Lantern Box. Exam season care packages, late night, stationery bundles, imported snacks sold in dormitory clusters before anyone else knew where to get them. At first, it was only for my campus, then 3 nearby universities,
Then,
6. Not because the idea was genius, because I tracked timing, preference, delivery, bottlenecks, and refund patterns with the same interest other girls my age gave to celebrity gossip. I found 2 students in each campus. Willing to work for commissions, I wrote cleaner instructions than they had ever received from their professors. Within 4 months, students who had never heard my name were making me money while I slept. When my father found out, he looked over the accounting sheet, set it down, and said only, "Your margins are sloppy." Then he pointed at a line item and added, "But your instincts are
Good.
My mother hugged me after he left and whispered, that was praise. From him, it counts as applause. A week later, one of my so-called friends sold a copy of Lantern Box's customer list to a cousin who wanted to replicate the model. When I confronted her, she cried before I did, told me I was rich already, told me she only borrowed the list, told me friendship should matter more than a spreadsheet. I remembered standing outside the dormitory, under a weak yellow lamp, looking at her tears, and understanding something cold and lasting. People always call theft emotional when they want mercy from the person they robbed. So I learned to write contracts even for classmates. I learned that affection without boundaries was just another unpaid liability. By the time Liu Chengzi stole my competition idea years later, I was angry but not surprised. Nothing taught me more about the market than other people's entitlement. The morning after he won that award with my work, he came to find me near the library. He stood with sunlight behind him, trophy case, smile already in place, and said, "You look tired. Were you up all night? As if he had not arranged the damage himself. As if he had come to inspect a flood and compliment the victim on her resilience. I asked him one question. If I had been a man, would you still have done it this way? He tilted his head. You make everything about gender. Maybe your plan simply was not strong enough. Then he touched my shoulder lightly. Performing kindness for the passing students. Try again next year. Failure builds character. I think that was the moment. Whatever softness remained in me toward him finally calcified, not because he stole. Plenty of people steal because he needed me to doubt my own memory. Afterward, he wanted not just my work, but my surrender to his version of events. Black Reef. Never asked why I wanted the traces preserved. Only whether I wanted revenge or advantage.
Both, I told him.
He whistled. Healthy? He had grown up in the kind of district where every staircase smelled like rainwater and old
Wiring.
The first time I visited the apartment he rented for his mother after he started working. With me, she made me noodles and thanked me for bringing her son back from becoming smoke. I did not know what to say to that, so I ate everything in the bowl and repaired their broken window latch before I left. Afterward, he never called me Director Moo in. Private again? Only Boss. It was Boss who received his message a year later when he finally cracked an old Liu family correspondence archive and found the chain connecting Liu Chengzai's student theft to one of his personal aides. He could have shown me. Then, he did not. He said later, you were still trying to love him in those years. Evidence is useless until the person holding it is ready to stop bargaining with disappointment. He was
Right.
That annoyed me more than anything. Readiness came slowly. It came through the thousand cuts of being explained to by men with less imagination than I had at 15. It came through family. Dinners where aunts I barely respected asked whether I truly intended to keep working after
marriage.
It came through Liu Chengzi once telling me, with sincere concern, that I should stop attending warehouse inspections because, too much sun would ruin my skin tone before engagement photos. It came through him standing in my office doorway one evening watching me edit a logistics risk matrix and saying, if you were not always trying to win people, would find you much easier to cherish. I remember turning my chair, looking at him in the fading light, and replying, then those people should buy a porcelain doll. It would be cheaper to
Maintain.
He laughed as if I were flirting. That was the problem. People like him heard resistance and translated it into foreplay, because the alternative was to admit they were
Not wanted.
When news of the Liu family's collapse started leaking despite all efforts to keep it tasteful, the social circle did what it always does. It became moral. Men who had gladly courted Liu Jianming's favor for 2 decades suddenly spoke solemnly about discipline and family governance. Women who had once praised Liu Chengzai's manners now sighed over the tragic waste of good breeding. Every third person who called my mother claimed to be concerned that I had made myself too formidable to marry, as if marriage were the final audit of a woman's life.
1.
Aunt sent me a voice note long enough to qualify as a hostage recording. She said, Jinghe, a girl should leave room for a man to protect her. You devour people. How will you ever live tenderly? I listened to it while reviewing customs throughput, models, and then replied with a single message. Tenderness is not the same as obedience. Please do not confuse your generation's coping mechanisms with virtues. My mother laughed so hard when she saw it that she spilled tea on a cashmere throw. Not everyone laughed. An article appeared in a business weekly, hinting that my rise owed more to familial indulgence and emotional volatility than capability. They quoted unnamed executives describing me as vindictive, unstable, and unable to separate private grievance from strategic judgment. The final paragraph praised the civilized restraint of Liu Chengzai. I printed the article, took a red pen, marked 12 factual inaccuracies and 3 legally actionable insinuations, then handed it to legal with one instruction. Choose the nastiest path that is still clean enough to survive daylight. They did. The paper retracted 48 hours later. The editor responsible resigned after it. Emerged he had accepted hospitality from a Liu-affiliated foundation. People called that overkill. I called it landscaping. Once you remove enough weeds, people stop pretending the snakes were flowers.
The
Hardest part of absorbing the Liu logistics arm was not the liabilities. It was the culture of apology surrounding mediocrity. Every broken process came wrapped in an explanation about
History.
every obsolete reporting line came with a story about loyalty. Every man who had failed upward for 15 years believed survival itself was proof of wisdom. I spent one entire Saturday night walking the old bonded yards with Joe Chien and the newly promoted site, Leeds. The river smelled metallic under winter mist. Storage lights blinked red in long patient rows. We wore steel toe boots, not because it was good theater, but because unfinished things still bite. At the north edge of yard 3, a foreman with nicotine yellowed fingers told me, "Miss, moo, with respect, this section has been delayed for years. Everyone says it can't be fixed. So the men have learned not to care too much." I climbed onto an empty pallet stacked to face the shift team because they were too tired to gather properly, and I was too tired to pretend. Hierarchy required better staging, then learn. Again, I said, if you do not care, the river will eat your work, your bonuses, and eventually your jobs. If you do care, this becomes the yard every other company copies in 3 years. I do not
Need your reverence?
I need your standards. Someone at the back muttered, easy to say from a heated office. So I climbed down, took the thermal scanner from the nearest technician, and spent the next 40 minutes tracing installation failures myself while the shift team watched in embarrassed silence. By the end, half of them were working beside me. Respect is expensive if you buy it with speeches, cheaper if you use your own hands at
The right moment.
my mother came to see the project once that
Winter.
she wore a cream coat entirely, unsuited to mud, and ignored my protest by stepping around puddles with elegant contempt for practical limitations. At the remediation platform overlooking the once contaminated bank, she stopped and looked out over the site in a long silence. When you
We're 12, she said. You asked me why?
businessmen always spoke to your father in circles. Do you remember what I told you? I did. I had been angry after sitting through a banquet where 6 men spent 2 hours discussing numbers without naming a single one. Clearly, she had bent down and told me, because direct desire frightens people, especially when it belongs to someone they expect to be decorative. Standing there, years later, I answered, "You told me to keep my own desire direct anyway." She touched my cheek,
And you did.
sometimes so directly that I worried you would end up alone. I smiled a little.
You still worry that
I do.
But I know. Longer mistake, solitude for failure. She looked back toward the water.
what you built?
Here could only have been built by someone who refused to wait for permission.
I think your
Grandmother would have loved that. She terrified everyone and wore pearls while doing it. That was another kind of inheritance. Not land, not cash, not stock. Temperament. Women who had survived men by understanding them better than men understood themselves. In early spring, Black Reef sent me a photograph with no explanation. It was taken from across a narrow street outside a private rehabilitation clinic. Lu Chengzhe, thinner than before, stepping out alone.
No.
Assistance.
No drivers.
No family crest. Just a man in a dark coat learning what happens after a life built on cushioning finally hits concrete. Attached beneath the photo was one line. Do you want the rest of the dirt too? I typed back, no. If he rises again, I will bury him twice. Until then, let him learn gravity. That was the truth of it. Revenge is overrated. Once your work grows larger than the people who injured you, I had wanted him destroyed. Then I had wanted him erased. Eventually, I only wanted him irrelevant. That is a colder ending and far more complete. By summer, Quaynine's first stage opening drew provincial officials, industry press, and the kind of investors who arrive late to everything and then congratulate themselves for recognizing inevitability. I stood on the platform under clean white lights and watched camera crews chase better angles around the charging yard and the glass-walled dispatch hub. Someone from a financial channel asked me whether I considered the project my greatest victory. So,
Far.
no, I said, this is only proof of concept. He blinked.
For what? For my real work.
And what is that? I looked past his shoulder toward the map screen inside the dispatch center, where river, rail, storage, and customs nodes glowed together like a thinking organism, rewriting the routes people confuse with destiny. He smiled politely the way interviewers do when they are not sure if they have just received genius or arrogance.
Maybe? Both.
That night, after the speeches and handshakes, and a dinner where 3 different men tried to ask whether I was seeing anyone serious, I returned to the penthouse and took off the gold serpent cuff. There was a faint red indentation beneath it. Power leaves marks. 2. That seemed fair. I poured a bowl of instant noodles instead of eating the plated meal the event had sent upstairs. Then I sat on the floor, shoes off, hair loose, and opened the city model on my tablet. Kaiyuan's tower was still there, cold, luminous, waiting. There are always people who think one victory should satisfy you, as though appetite is impolite in women, as though once you have proved yourself competent, you ought to soften into gratitude. But competence is not a destination. It is leverage, and leverage unused decays into decoration. So, I studied Kaiyuan's routes, their insurance structures, their idle inland depots, their elegant chairman who had once said I was only a girl with a famous surname and a strategic smile. I touched the screen where their western corridor glowed. The thing about maps is that most people think they describe the world. What they really describe is what someone was powerful enough to claim at the time they were. Drawn, I had not spent my life fighting doors, families, polished thieves, and inherited smugness just to live inside somebody else's map. I had the key. I had the routes, and now, finally, I had enough teeth for the world to notice.